to the Cook Islands tonight.
Climate change, geopolitics and Pacific unity will all be issues on the agenda there.
We have a handsome boy coming from Australia.
I think I'm not quite sure how to respond to that.
The most important meeting of his prime ministership.
From all of our friends from down under.
President Biden views Australia as a critical ally.
It is international summit season, a necessary fixture in any Prime Minister's calendar in recent years, but one which disrupts political management at home and can prompt some cheap shots from the opposition of the day.
Calling him Airbus Albo, it's a bit rich, isn't it?
Yes, of course we wish him well on another overseas visit, but my goodness, there are problems here at home.
Prime Ministers used to only go overseas perhaps once or twice in any parliamentary term, but there is now a clear season of meetings, from the G20 to ASEAN, APEC and the Pacific Islands Forum to be attended. And this year, a couple of particularly important meetings with our most important ally and our biggest trading partner. The problem for Anthony Albanese, or any Prime Minister really, is that the voting public sees little value in these meetings and it often doesn't feel like there is so much to show for them.
The band learnt 5 Australian songs, including I Still Call Australia Home and Click Go the Shears. Our hosts have gone out of their way to show us courtesy and respect.
That's not to say the trips have not been important, particularly the trip to China. It was, after all, the first visit by an Australian Prime Minister in 7 years. It was important to seize the opportunity of a shift in strategy by the Chinese, even if the word that summed up the trip was stabilisation of the relationship. It's important that regular leaders' dialogue and meetings by other ministers have been resumed. It's a far cry from the days under the Morrison government when ministers couldn't even get their counterparts to pick up the phone. Trade is opening up again, and both countries have interests in common, including climate change and the Pacific.
We're playing a positive role, not just with our commitment to reduce our emissions by 43% by 2030 and to reach net zero by 2050, but that importantly, we are playing a role in the region and indeed around the globe.
Australia and the Prime Minister faced questions in Rarotonga about whether we were doing enough on climate change. But the government seems to have also been shuffling a bit in its language on climate change at home and what it is doing to address that.
It's important for me, I think, to acknowledge that without more decisive action across all levels of government, working with investors and industry and communities, the energy transition could fall short of what the country needs.
The Treasurer's tone seemed a little more cautious than that of the Climate Change and Energy Minister, Chris Bowen.
Here we are, a policy which requires 5% emissions reduction a year from a third of the Australian economy, and what's happening? We're getting on with it.
But it's not like the Treasurer is suggesting any huge shifts to address any policy shortfalls, just a statement of expectations from the Productivity Commission.
I will be releasing the first statement of expectations for the Productivity Commission in its 25-year history. It will make clear that guiding our country towards a successful net zero transformation will be one of the key focus areas for a revamped and renewed Productivity Commission.
Chalmers' cautious move on climate at the Productivity Commission was matched by another move this week, which had that air of a government wanting to look like it was doing something rather than necessarily doing something. This time, doing something about inflation. Cuts of over $30 billion to major infrastructure projects were flagged on the basis that a huge infrastructure pipeline is adding to inflation. This is based on an infrastructure review which has not yet been publicly released, and on projects which haven't been specified. It all smacked a little of a government struggling to regain momentum in the wake of the referendum defeat.
This afternoon, the Independent Reserve Bank has increased interest rates by 25 basis points to 4.35%. This will make life harder for people who are already doing it tough. They take these decisions independently, they can explain those decisions, and I refer you to the statement for the explanation of what's happened today.
This week's interest rate rise hasn't exactly helped Project regaining momentum at home, and even made a rare domestic intervention into the PM's overseas travels.
A major focus of this visit has been on Australian job creation, on the benefit that we can get by dealing with the impediments to our trade which have been there. We are very focused on Australian jobs and the Australian economy and Australian living standards, which is why we continue to have as our number one priority cost of living relief.
There's been other things dominating the headlines outside the government's control this week: a major telecommunications network going offline and bringing down businesses and transport systems across the country, a High Court decision on indefinite immigration detention.
The opposition of the government will be recorded.
And today, the Senate deciding to go its own way on the government's Omnibus Industrial Relations Bill, splitting off some non-contentious sections to pass immediately.
The Omnibus Bill, it is a beast of a bill.
Some things never change, though.
Well, I'll tell you Maureen Faruqi again, Senator Faruqi, all right? I'll tell you again. If you don't see yourself as loving this country and abiding by the laws of the country, I have no problem. I'll actually take you to the airport and put you on a plane and wave you hooray. I withdraw any remarks considered unparliamentary this week.
The House of Representatives returns next week for its second last week of sittings for the year. Electoral reforms are just one issue Parliament has to deal with before Christmas. It might be one of those times when the Prime Minister wishes he was back overseas and dealing with less complicated issues.
Let me just say this about pandas. I'm pro-panda. Let's be very clear. Pandas are wonderful